The Euromaidan was a wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine, which began on the night of the 21st of November 2013 with very large public protests demanding closer European integration. The scope of the protests evolved over subsequent months, culminating in resignation of Azarov's government and ousting of President Yanukovych. Protesters also have stated they joined because of the dispersal of protesters on the 30th of November and the will to change life in Ukraine. By the 25th of January 2014, the protests had been fueled by the perception of widespread government corruption, abuse of power, and violation of human rights in Ukraine. 21 to 29 November 2013. Euromaidan started in the night of the 21st of November 2013 when up to 2,000 protesters gathered at Kiev's Maidan Nezalezhnosti and began to organize themselves with the help of social networks, after he heard of the Ukrainian government decree to suspend preparations for signing of the association agreement on the 21st of November 2013. Opposition party Batkivshina faction leader Arseniy Yatsenyuk called via Twitter for protests on Maidan Nezalezhnosti. The blog of Yuri Andreevon correspondent Net asked people to gather on Maidan Nezalezhnosti that day at 22:30. Approximately 2,000 people converged in the evening of the 22nd of November on Maidan Nezalezhnosti to protest the decision of the Ukrainian government to suspend the process of integration of Ukraine into the European Union. In the following days, the opposition and pro-EU parties led the protests. A larger rally took place on the 24th of November, when 50,000 to 200,000 people gathered on Kiev's Maidan Nezalezhnosti. The pro-EU demonstrators carrying Ukrainian and EU flags chanted "Ukraine is Europe" and sang the national anthem as they marched toward European Square for the rally. News agencies claimed this to be the largest protest since the Orange Revolution of 2004. After a small group of protesters attempted to storm the government building, police used tear gas to disperse them. Protesters also used tear gas and some firecrackers. According to the General Prosecutor's Office, more than 400 people were injured from the 24th of November to the 13th of December, including 200 policemen and 18 students. On the 25th of November, jailed former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko began a hunger strike in protest of President Yanukovych's reluctance to sign the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Of the 26th of November 2013 statement by Ukrainian Prime Minister Mykola Azarov saying, "I affirm with full authority that the negotiating process over the association agreement is continuing, and the work on moving our country closer to European standards is not stopping for a single day," did not appease protesters who blockaded the government building during the cabinet session during which Azarov made the above-mentioned statement. The same day, the city of Kiev installed a heating tent at Maidan Nezalezhnosti, where about 2,000 students were rallying. According to KYIV Post, this was part of an Ukrainian authorities' attempt to portray themselves as allies with the demonstrators who, in many cases, are calling for the government to resign if it doesn't sign an association agreement with the European Union this week. The same day, it was reported that social media accounts of protesters were being hacked and disreputable messages being posted in place of rally news and commentary. On 26 and the 27th of November 2013, Lithuanian Parliament Speaker Loreta Grauzanin and Polish Sejm member Marcin Wysocki spoke to the protesters at Maidan Nezalezhnosti. Musical acts like Ruslana put on performances for demonstrators on Maidan Nezalezhnosti. On the 27th of November, it was reported that the Kharkiv Polytechnical Institute staff allegedly checked class attendance threatening truant students who attend the pro-EU rallies in Kiev with expulsion. In other universities, administrators forbade students from joining pro-EU protests, posting political commentary to social media networks, and wearing Ukraine-EU ribbons. According to Euronews, the protesters in Kiev numbered 10,000 people, many of them students. At noon of the 28th of November, about 3,000 people gathered on Maidan Nezalezhnosti. No party symbols were reported, only Ukrainian flags and European Union flags. The crowd grew to 4,000 by the evening, while it was again entertained by popular Ukrainian artists. On the 29th of November 2013, it became clear that Ukraine did not sign the association agreement at the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius. The number of protesters in Kiev swelled to 10,000. In Lviv, protesters numbered some 20,000. As in Kiev, the Lviv protesters locked hands in a human chain, symbolically linking Ukraine to the European Union. Euronews reported that protesters in Kiev believed the rally should go on and were calling for the second Azarov government's and President Viktor Yanukovych's resignation. The 30th of November attack on protesters. On the night of the 30th of November 2013 at 4 o'clock, armed with batons, stun grenades, and tear gas, Berkut special police units attacked and dispersed all protesters from Maidan Nezalezhnosti while suppressing mobile phone communications. The police attacked not only the protesters but also other civilians in the vicinity of Maidan Nezalezhnosti. When the Berkut forces chased unarmed people several hundreds of meters and continued to beat them with batons and feet. Initially, 35 people were injured as a result of the militia raid, including a Reuters cameraman and a photographer. Other protesters were detained. Most of protesters were students. At 9:20, Berkut besieged the St. Michael's golden-domed monastery, where approximately 50 Euromaidan activists, including the injured, found sanctuary. Police spokeswoman Ola Bilik justified the police raid by saying that protesters were interfering with preparations to decorate the square for the Christmas and New Year's holidays, and accused them of throwing stones and burning logs. Minister of Internal Affairs Vitaly Zakharchenko later apologized and claimed riot police abused the power and promised a thorough investigation. Via state television he added, "If there are calls for mass disturbances, then we will react to this harshly." In an official statement, Ukrainian Deputy Prosecutor General Anatoly Prishko confirmed that 79 people were injured during the raid, including 6 students, 4 reporters, and 2 foreigners. 10 people were hospitalized. In addition, 7 policemen were also injured. On the 30th of November 2013 by 1300, another spontaneous meeting was taking place at St. Michael's Square near the St. Michael's Monastery as Maidan Nezalezhnosti continued to be guarded by the Berkut formations. Ambassadors from some 10 countries of the European Union, among which was the ambassador of the European Union in Ukraine, Jan Tombinsky, visited protesters at the meeting. According to Hromadska TV, by 1600 the meeting gathered some 5,000 people who were shouting "Won't forgive" and "Revolution." At St. Michael's Square, protesters started to form units of self-resistance. Approximately 10,000 protesters remained in the evening of the 30th, with an estimated 10,000 more from Lviv traveling to Kiev on Saturday night. On the 30th of November, opposition parties Bacchus China, UDAR and Svoboda set up headquarters of national resistance throughout Ukraine. The 1st of December 2013, Euromaidan riots. A series of riots occurred in several locations of downtown Kiev, Ukraine, on the 1st of December 2013 in response to a violent police crackdown on Euromaidan's peaceful protesters and journalists on the night of the 30th of November. The day saw the highest numbers of journalists injured by police in a single event since Ukraine's independence regain in 1991. Also, the 1st of December became the first instance of a public building being occupied by protesters in modern history of the country. 2 to 7 December 2013. The day after the riots, peaceful protests continued to take place and occupy Maidan Nezalezhnosti in Kiev, with tens of thousands attending, while thousands blocked the main cabinet buildings. According to BBC correspondent David Stern, they have set up almost a military camp of sorts, and have erected a very impressive barricade around the perimeter of the demonstration. David M. Hirschhorn of The New York Times described the square as oddly festive and added that protest leaders, sensing that momentum had turned to their advantage, continued to add infrastructure to their operation, bringing in television monitors and erecting the small tent city. Elsewhere, Lviv, Ternopil and Ivano-Frankivsk announced a general strike in solidarity with the movement. 1,000 internal troops were deployed to Kiev around key government buildings by the Interior Ministry. The Parliament Committee on Statehood and Self-Governance recommended a vote of no confidence in Prime Minister Mykola Azarov's government, opening a way for such a vote on the 3rd of December. The Kiev City Council building remained occupied by protesters. Workers at Kiev City Council were still allowed to enter and work. On the 3rd of December, the Azarov government survived the vote of no confidence with 186 MPs supporting the motion, and all but one Party of Regions MP abstaining from the vote. At least 226 votes were needed. However, the Communist Party of Ukraine, that had not supported this vote, stated that on the 4th of December they would put forward their own no-confidence motion, based on the government's management of the economy. If the 186 MPs supporting the 3rd of December motion support the 4th of December no-confidence motion, which they have stated they will, the 4th of December motion will pass, with over 226 votes. In his speech to Parliament, Azarov warned protesters occupying the Kiev City State Administration that force could be used to remove them. In the morning of the 3rd of December, Euronews described the situation in Kiev as calm at the moment. However, tensions have remained high. Clashes with riot police did occur outside of Parliament. In the afternoon, in freezing conditions, several thousand protesters rallied on Maidan Nezalezhnosti, where opposition leaders gave passionate speeches. After the speeches, the crowd moved to the presidential administration building. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, over 10,000 demonstrators rallied on Maidan Nezalezhnosti in the evening of the 3rd of December. It also noted that it had recorded no incidents. Demonstrators started to pitch about 10 army tents on the square, and about 10 on Khreshchatyk, while Ukrainian performers entertained the demonstrators. Interfax Ukraine reported that opposition leaders Arseniy Yatsenyuk, Oleh Tyahnybok and Vitaly Klitschko met with foreign ambassadors that same evening. The next day they met with German Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle in Kiev. On the 5th of December 2013, the protests continued with several thousand demonstrators continuing to rally on Maidan Nezalezhnosti. An Interfax correspondent reported that the situation on the square is calm and that wooden barricades were installed installed on Instytitska and Horodetskoe Street, and Interfax Ukraine correspondent reported that police buses blocked several streets leading to the Verkhovna Rada and that about 150 people, waving flags of Svoboda in the red and black flags of Ukrainian nationalists, were rallying in front of the central entrance to the Budino Kuria-Do. Meanwhile, several hundred supporters of the Party of Regions and President Yanukovych pitched a camp on the square in Mariinsky Park. The OSCE Security Group summit in Kiev advanced his plan. Victoria Siemar, a prominent journalist and former head of Institute of Mass Information, reported that Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andriy Kliuyev, met with TV managers on the 6th of December urging them to limit Euromaidan coverage. This took place concurrent to Prime Minister Azarov's critical statement of the media in the country, in which he stated there was a lack of coverage towards pro-government rallies, a disproportionate bias in coverage, and that everywhere is dominated by only one point of view, and it is a distortion of reality, away from democracy. The same day, the director of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights within the OSCE, Janez Lenarczyk, stated that the government's demand that protesters unblock governmental buildings was lawful and fully consistent with the acceptable restrictions on the freedom of assembly. However, he also stated that the 30th of November court ban on demonstrations in central Kiev was an unqualified ban on demonstrations, in other words on peaceful assemblies, which is disproportionate and in contradiction to Ukraine's OSCE commitments. Jailed former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko ended her hunger strike that she had started on the 25th of November in protest of President Yanukovych's reluctance to sign the DCFTA on the 6th of December. The same day, police and a court order blocked a planned protest at President Yanukovych's private residence Mizhihirya. An unscheduled meeting between President Yanukovych and Russian President Vladimir Putin took place in the South Russian city of Sochi on the 6th of December, 2013. Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister Leonid Kozara stated the cooperative agreements signed in Sochi were primarily in the fields of in-space, aircraft construction and engineering. Prime Minister Mykola Azarov elaborated on the matter, saying the two met to discuss the drafting of a strategic partnership agreement, eliminate disputes over trading and economic issues, and in a separate announcement told journalists that the president would soon visit Moscow on the 17th of December, where a major agreement would be signed. This prompted opposition leader Arseniy Yatsenyuk to issue a stern warning towards Yanukovych, saying if Yanukovych tries to sign anything with Russia about a customs union, it will lead to a bigger wave of protests. Later, The Economist's senior editor Edward Lucas, citing his own diplomatic sources, reported on his Twitter that Yanukovych had allegedly signed a pact with Russia which included terms whereby Ukraine would receive $5 billion and a natural gas price reduction in exchange for an agreement to join their customs union at a later date. Upon hearing the news, opposition leaders expressed fury and demanded that the alleged documents be made public immediately. The governments of Russia and Ukraine categorically denied any customs union talks took place during the meetings. However, Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov did confirm that the two sides discussed financial aid and credit, and were also now significantly closer in talks over natural gas prices. At the same time, Yatsenyuk claimed to have information that the planned 17th of December Ukrainian-Russian Strategic Partnership Agreement would involve Ukraine's joining of the customs union. but added that Ukraine's parliament would be unlikely to ratify it. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry stated on the 10th of December that no documents were expected to be signed, and naturally, no documents were signed during the Sochi meeting. It also informed that a Ukrainian delegation would attend the 13th of December CIS Economic Council in Moscow, where special attention will be given to the aspects of the realization of the Treaty of a Free Trade Zone of October 18, 2011.